She helped a stranger find his hotel, then found out he was one of Europe's richest men. But what hurt most wasn't the secret, it was what it revealed about her. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The rain came down in steady sheets over Hartford, Connecticut, coating the sidewalks and blurring the orange glow of streetlights into smeared halos on the pavement. It was nearly midnight, and most of the city had retreated indoors, behind curtains and soft lamplight. On Main Street, the rain drowned out footsteps, even breathing. Harper Quinn, 24, adjusted the straps of her frayed backpack and tugged the thin hood of her coat tighter around her face. Her sneakers were soaked, each step squished with a chill she'd long grown used to. She had just finished a grueling double shift at Maple and Main Diner, 10 hours on her feet, 5 of them without a single break. Now, she was heading back to the tiny third-floor apartment she shared with her 12-year-old sister, Lena, who was homesick with a fever, curled up on the couch with a damp washcloth and no dinner. The streets were mostly empty, just the occasional cab slicing through puddles and a lone figure huddled beneath a closed shop's awning. Then came the voice, "Excuse me, miss? I'm sorry to bother you. I think I'm lost." She froze for a second, startled by the voice. It wasn't threatening, more like uncertain, vulnerable. She turned to see a man standing uncomfortably beneath the small awning of chapter and verse books, the neighborhood's old second-hand bookstore. He was dripping wet, his hair plastered to his forehead, his coat darkened by rain. He held a crumpled piece of paper in his hands. "I lost my phone," he said, his accent thick, possibly French. "I walked from the train station. I thought it was close." Harper stepped closer, eyeing the paper. It was a partially torn map with the Hartford Grand Hotel circled in fading blue ink. The street name was smeared, but she recognized it instantly. "That's about 7 blocks from here," she said, tilting her head. "You've been heading in the opposite direction." The man closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. "I knew it. I took a left instead of a right. I've been walking in circles." She hesitated. Her apartment was 20 minutes away, and she still needed to stop by Wellspring Pharmacy to pick up medicine for Lena. But the guy looked genuinely lost and absolutely frozen. "I'll walk you there," she said before she could stop herself. His eyes widened. "You don't have to." "Really? I know this area better than anyone," Harper replied, managing a faint smile. "Besides, you look like you're about to turn into a popsicle." He let out a relieved laugh. "Merci. Thank you. Truly." They walked side by side through the rain, their footsteps blending with the distant hum of passing traffic and the occasional splash of tires through water. The city around them was a blur of reflections and dim windows. "My name's Cole Morrow," he said after a moment. "I'm from Paris. It's my first time in Hartford." "Harper," she said, "you really picked a great night to explore." "I was supposed to arrive this afternoon," he explained. "But my flight was delayed. Then I lost my luggage. Then my phone died, and now I'm just the definition of a lost tourist." "You're not the worst I've seen," Harper replied with a smirk. He chuckled again, his shoulders relaxing just a little. He told her he wasn't here for business or vacation exactly, more like a break from everything. "Sometimes even Paris feels too loud," he said quietly. "Even when it's silent." She didn't fully get it, but she nodded anyway. "And you?" he asked. "You work close by?" "The diner on Maple and Main," she answered. "I've been there nearly 3 years." Cole glanced at her with quiet curiosity. "And when you're not rescuing drenched foreigners?" Harper smiled faintly. "Mostly just trying to keep the lights on. And raise my little sister." He didn't ask for more. He didn't need to. When they reached the Hartford Grand, a charming old hotel tucked between a credit union and a souvenir shop, Cole stopped under the canopy. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You didn't have to do this." "It's fine," Harper replied, brushing wet strands of hair from her forehead. "I'm just glad you're not wandering anymore." He looked at her for a moment longer, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something surprising, a neatly folded handkerchief. It looked oddly clean, even in this weather. "You gave me your time. Let me give you something warm." She took it hesitantly, then nodded once. "Good night, Cole." "Good night, Harper." She turned and disappeared into the rain, not knowing how much that one choice, to help a stranger, would shift the course of her life. The apartment smelled faintly of damp socks and old detergent when Harper walked in, shivering from the cold. The radiator had been broken for weeks. The hallway light flickered once, then gave up entirely. She slipped off her soaked shoes, her socks squishing on the cracked linoleum. "Lena," she called softly. A faint voice came from the small bedroom, "In here." She dropped her bag and went in. Lena lay curled under a worn blanket on their narrow twin mattress, a cool towel pressed to her forehead. Her cheeks were flushed, and the hoodie she wore seemed to swallow her whole. Hey, Harper whispered, brushing wet strands from her sister's face. Still running hot? Lena nodded, her eyes hazy with fever. Harper kissed her forehead, then went to the tiny kitchen. The fridge held only a bottle of mustard, a wilted lemon, and one questionable egg. The cupboard wasn't much better. A crushed but unopened packet of instant noodles sat on the top shelf. She sighed, filled a pot with water, and added a pinch of salt, the egg, and a splash of soy sauce. It wasn't much, but it would be enough. She stirred gently, steam fogging the window near the sink. Back in the bedroom, she sat beside Lena and fed her spoon by spoon until the girl's eyelids began to droop. Will you be home tomorrow? Lena murmured. Of course, Harper whispered. She didn't mention that she'd picked up an extra shift. Once Lena was tucked in, Harper returned to the kitchen table, still damp from the storm. She powered up her ancient laptop, waiting for the flickering screen to come alive. It groaned, then lit up. She opened the scholarship application she'd started a month ago but never finished. Slowly, carefully, she typed. She didn't write about being exhausted or afraid. She wrote about her dream to teach, to help kids like Lena grow up believing they mattered. She wrote until the sky outside her window began to lighten. The next morning was like any other. She skipped breakfast, tied back her hair, pulled on her threadbare sneakers, and walked down 3 flights of stairs. On the way out, she passed their landlord, Mr. Feldman, standing in the hallway with his arms crossed. You're behind again. 3 more days, Harper said, her voice tight. I promise. The Maple and Main diner buzzed with noise. Clattering dishes, orders yelled across the counter, conversations rising and falling like waves. Harper tied on her apron and smiled her way through the morning. She poured coffee for people who didn't look up, scrubbed sticky syrup off menus, refilled ketchup bottles, and cleared dishes heavier than they looked. By noon, her legs were aching. By 2 p.m., her lower back had gone numb. At 5, she took a 3-minute break behind the staff fridge, drank lukewarm water, and returned when her name was shouted from the kitchen. During her only real pause, she leaned against the brick wall in the alley out back, staring at her phone. No missed calls. No response to her scholarship. Nothing. Her coworker, Rosa, lit a cigarette beside her. You look like you wrestled a thundercloud last night. Harper gave a dry chuckle. Feels about right? Rosa squinted at her. Saw you walking with some guy yesterday. Tourist? Harper nodded. Got lost? No phone. Didn't know where his hotel was? And you helped him in the rain? Harper shrugged. Girl, he looked like he could afford a limo made of gold. I didn't help him because of that, Harper said. I helped him because nobody else would have. Rosa shook her head. You're gonna burn out doing that. Maybe, Harper said, gazing at the sky, thick with gray. But not today. She tossed her empty cup, tied her apron back on, and went inside, ready to serve the next customer, an elderly woman who ordered coffee with too much sugar and asked about the weather like it was breaking news. That night, Harper counted her tips, $18.43. Enough for Lena's medicine and maybe a loaf of bread. As she walked home beneath flickering streetlights, her feet sore and her steps slow, she didn't think about Cole or what might have happened if she hadn't stopped that night. She thought of Lena, of overdue bills, of scholarship essays sent into the void. But underneath all the weariness and the weight of survival, there was still something alive inside her. Hope, fragile, foolish, but quietly beating. She didn't know her choice to help a stranger had already changed everything. She only knew how to keep going, step by step. The next evening, as the diner filled with its usual din of clinking plates and murmured orders, the bell over the door jingled. Harper looked up from the counter, ready to smile. But the smile faded. It was him. Cole stood near the entrance, not soaked and shivering this time, but calm, composed. His coat was sleek and tailored, his scarf knotted with quiet precision, his shoes polished. But it wasn't the clothes that threw her. It was the look in his eyes, soft, familiar. As if he was seeing her again, not just noticing. Harper, he said, walking up to the counter. You made it, she said, blinking, still a little stunned. He reached into his coat and pulled something out wrapped in plastic to keep it safe. I believe this is yours, he said, placing the handkerchief on the counter. It had been cleaned, pressed, folded perfectly. I couldn't leave without returning it. And thanking you properly. Harper looked around. Her manager was barking at someone in the kitchen. No customer line yet. She had maybe 10 minutes. If this is a bad time. Cole started. She cut in softly, I've got a break coming up. They walked to a nearby park still wet from the week's rain, though a patch of late winter sun had begun to dry the benches. Cole bought them both coffee from a street vendor, black for him, sweet and creamy for her. They sat quietly sipping while bare trees rustled in the breeze overhead. "So how are you?" he asked gently. Harper responded with a shrug. "I'm fine." "No," he said, meeting her eyes. "How are you really?" She was caught off guard, not because the question was rare, but because no one had asked it with that kind of sincerity in a long time. She let the silence settle, then finally said, "Tired. Most of the time. Hopeful sometimes. Other times, not so much." Cole nodded like he understood exactly. "And you?" she asked. "Did you find your phone?" "Your luggage." "I stayed longer than I planned," he replied. "This city, being lost in it, it reminded me how small I am. And sometimes that's not such a bad thing." "Most people hate feeling small," Harper said, raising an eyebrow. "I used to," Cole admitted. "But now, I think that's when we pay the most attention. When we realize how much we've missed." They drank in a peaceful hush. "Do you always help strangers?" he asked suddenly. "Only the ones who look like they need it." "Then I was lucky." She glanced at him with a half-smile. "You looked like a soaked puppy. I felt like one." They laughed. Her phone buzzed. "Break over." "I should get back," Harper said, standing slowly. "Of course." Cole rose with her. "May I see you again?" She hesitated, not from doubt, but surprise. It wasn't often that someone wanted to see her for who she really was. "Maybe," she said. "I work a lot. I'm good at finding people," he said with a crooked smile. She gave a small nod and turned toward the diner. He stood watching her go, holding his empty coffee cup while a breeze lifted his scarf. Inside the building, Harper tied on her apron again and returned to her station, heart a little lighter. They began meeting in the early mornings, always before her shift. The city was quieter then. Half asleep, its edges softened. There was a stillness that both of them seemed to crave. Sometimes they sat at a tiny cafe near Bushnell Park, where the same barista learned their orders within days. Black coffee for Cole, chai latte with extra cinnamon for Harper. Other mornings, they strolled the Riverwalk, watching the light change from silver to gold across the Connecticut River. One day, Cole brought 2 croissants wrapped in brown paper. They sat on the steps outside the Mark Twain Library, sharing the buttery pastries in silence. "This feels stolen," Harper said suddenly. "Stolen?" Cole asked, amused. "Like we took a piece of calm from the rest of the world before it woke up." Cole nodded. "Then let's hope no one calls the cops." She laughed. And for a moment she didn't feel heavy. She didn't feel like someone carrying too much alone. Their conversations were never dramatic monologues. They came in pieces. Bits of trust built carefully like stones in a wall they were finally learning to take down. "My parents died in a fire when I was 16, Harper told him one morning. Her voice was even flat, but not bitter. "Lena was only 6. It's been us ever since." "I'm sorry," Cole said, his voice low. "I wanted to be a teacher. Still do. Life just had other plans." He didn't offer sympathy. Just silence. And listening. One morning, sitting on a bench by the duck pond, he shared something of his own. "I used to be someone important," he said quietly. "Publicly, anyway. My name showed up in business magazines. People quoted things I said in conferences." Harper looked over at him. "But I haven't felt like anyone in a long time. After my mother died, it's like the lights stayed on, but nothing inside me did." He stared at his hands, then met her eyes. "Everyone saw my name, but no one really saw me." Harper didn't answer with words. She simply reached out and placed a hand gently over his wrist. A moment of connection. A presence that said, "I see you now." They both knew what it meant to live with absence, to survive in spaces where no one looked too closely. And here, in this unlikely bond, they were slowly remembering how to be seen again. Not the way the world sees with headlines or judgment, but in the quiet way someone does when they actually care. One chilly morning, as snow flurried around them, Cole pulled his scarf off and wrapped it around Harper's neck before she could protest. "The wind in this town has no manners," he said, grinning. She rolled her eyes but didn't remove it. Another day, Harper handed him a thermos of tea. "Your voice sounded rough yesterday." He took it and smiled. "Are you always this thoughtful?" "Only to people who return handkerchiefs," she teased. He laughed. Really laughed, the kind that reached his eyes. And Harper realized how rare it was to see someone like him so unguarded. Their bond wasn't fast or fiery. It grew quietly, steadily. Not in dramatic moments, but in the spaces between them. Shared silences, gentle glances, unspoken understanding. For Harper, it was the first time in years someone had asked her what she wanted, not just what she could handle. For Cole, it was the first time someone looked at him and didn't ask for anything more than honesty. One morning, just before her shift, he walked her to the front door of the diner. "Do you ever wish your life had gone differently?" he asked. She paused. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But if it had, I might never have stopped to help a guy wandering in the rain." He looked at her then, not with admiration or gratitude, but something deeper, something fragile, something real. And she saw it. He was healing. And maybe, just maybe, so was she. The article hit like a punch to the chest. It was a slow Thursday morning at Maple and Main when Rosa slammed her phone onto the counter. "Harper, is this your lost tourist?" Harper leaned over, expecting a funny meme or tourist fail. Instead, her stomach dropped. French tech billionaire Cole Moreau spotted in Hartford, low-key visit sparks buzz. A photo showed Cole walking through Bushnell Park, scarf loose, coffee in hand, relaxed, smiling. She froze. Her eyes raced through the headline again. CEO of Mornova Industries, one of Europe's richest men, on sabbatical after mother's passing. Everything tilted. Her breath caught in her throat. Every memory twisted, his soft voice, modest clothes, careful silence about work. He hadn't lied, but he'd hidden the biggest part of himself. And she had fallen for a man she didn't truly know. That night, Harper didn't show up at the park. She went straight home, held Lena longer than usual, and stared at the wall until the city went quiet. She replayed everything. His silence. His warmth. His gentleness. But also the omission. The weight of what he hadn't said. And suddenly she felt foolish. The next morning he came to the diner. No bodyguards. No limo. Just Cole, same coat, same eyes. She met him outside, arms crossed, heart pounding. "So, it's true?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes. You're a billionaire." "Yes. How long were you planning to keep that to yourself?" "I wasn't sure I'd tell you at all," he said quietly. "Because I didn't want you to meet that version of me." She laughed a sharp hollow. "And what version did you show me? The poor, lost tourist?" "That part was real," Cole said. "I was lost. Just not in the way you thought." "You lied to me," Harper said. "I kept something from you, yes. Because the moment people know my name, they stop seeing me. And you didn't think I deserved the truth?" She asked, voice rising. "I hoped," he said gently, "that you'd meet the real me first. The one who isn't in magazines or spreadsheets. Just me." "Cole." She shook her head. "I thought you saw me. But maybe you saw someone kind, helpful, easy to admire. I'm also tired. And angry. And messy. You don't need to be perfect," he said. "I never wanted that. But I care about that world," she said, voice cracking. "Because I'll never belong in it." He reached for her hand. She pulled away. "You have no idea what it's like to grow up believing you only matter when someone chooses you. And now someone did. And it still feels like a joke." "I never wanted to make you feel like that," he whispered. "But I do," she said, her voice barely holding. The silence between them grew heavy. "If you need space," Cole said quietly, "I'll give it. But not because I've stopped caring. I'm still here. I always have been." Harper didn't reply. She turned and walked away, coat billowing behind her, eyes burning. And for the first time, Cole didn't follow, not because he didn't want to, but because he finally understood. This wasn't just about the secret. It was about the wound it touched. And for Harper, walking away from something that had started to feel like home was the hardest thing she'd ever done. But she didn't feel worthy, not yet. The envelope was simple and light, tucked inside the same handkerchief Harper had once taken from him in the rain. It appeared at the front counter of Maple and Main Diner without a name or return address, just Harper written in clean, familiar handwriting. She opened it at the kitchen table after her shift with the city asleep and Lena curled up nearby. Inside was a letter, penned in steady, deliberate strokes. "Harper, you reminded me how to feel, not as someone with titles or headlines, but simply as a person. I came to Hartford to disappear. Instead, I found you. I know I hurt you. That was never my intention. But some wounds aren't mine to heal. I only hope that one day you'll believe you are enough because you see it, not because I say it. And when that day comes, I hope you'll let someone love you, truly. Thank you for everything. Cole **. Harper sat in silence, the letter pressed to her chest, her vision blurred by tears. But for once, those tears weren't made of despair. They were made of something softer, release. She didn't write back. Not right away. Instead, she folded the letter, tucked it beneath a stack of old college brochures in her drawer, and got to work. The next day, she picked up an application from Hartford Community College. A week later, she sat with an advisor, explained her financial situation, and asked, clearly, firmly, what it would take to finish her teaching certification. She also signed up to volunteer at the Haven Center, a learning space on the east side for immigrant children. It didn't pay, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was building something again. One afternoon, a boy she tutored handed her a crayon drawing. It was of her in front of a chalkboard with a crown on her head. "Miss Harper is the queen of school," it read. She taped it above her bed. The ache of Cole's absence never vanished entirely, but it no longer defined her. Some nights, she'd open the drawer, reread his letter, and hold the fabric of the old handkerchief between her fingers. She didn't know where he was. She wasn't waiting anymore. Then, one golden afternoon outside the Haven Center, as children spilled out laughing, she felt it, his presence. Cole stood near the curb, no limo, no headlines, just a simple box in his hand and hope in his eyes. "I'm not here to fix your life," he said. "I know you never needed saving." Her eyes softened. "I'm here because you saved mine." Inside the box was a simple wooden ring carved from a tree in his mother's backyard. "Not gold," he said. "Just honest." She reached for his hand and smiled. "You can put it on later. For now, just walk with me." And so they did. Not as perfect people, but as real ones, scarred, healing, human. Together.